Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining. I appreciate for our last Heritage and Landmark Commission meeting of the year. So hope everyone's doing well. Appreciate your time here tonight. So we have everyone in attendance, which I really appreciate. Jennifer is also on Zoom tonight, as well as I am. And so we have a pretty light agenda for tonight, but there might be some opportunities for several of you to ask questions. So the first thing is just the approval of the minutes from last month's meeting. I sent those out with the agenda, so I'm looking for someone to provide a motion to approve the minutes from our November meeting.
So moved.
Thank you.
One correction. So, under October meeting minutes, Jennifer's last name is spelled incorrectly.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Anybody want a second for the November meeting minutes?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you very much. So those are approved. Really appreciate that. Appreciate excellent note taking. So thank you very much for that, Rachel. And through the year, we're always very prompt at getting that done and getting those approved and posted. So that's awesome. Several good things. Okay, so then tonight, really the only other thing on the agenda is to talk through the process for the public hearing. It's been quite some time. It's funny, the last time we did a public hearing, was for the Historic City Hall. We all had masks on. So it's been a while. So I thought I would talk through the process, and we can talk through some questions, but we really can't talk much about the content of specifically your ideas about whether or not, the depot should be on the historic register or not. That has to happen in the public hearing. So I just want to go through sort of the step-by-step of what happens at the public hearing. So the first thing that happens is I read a long script that just describes the kind of the quasi-judicial process that for the public and everyone in attendance to understand how this, who speaks when and who has a turn to do what. And so the first thing that happens is I read the script, and then I call for any of you on the HLC to just self-describe if you have any conflict of interest in this matter. That typically would mean you have something to personally gain from it. Or maybe you're related to somebody that is proposing this, and so you might have to take yourself out of the voting. But it's pretty rare that there's a conflict of interest with a historic process like this, unless like maybe you own the building or something like that, or you own what's in the building. So that's sort of where that's headed. So when I ask for conflict of interest, just think in your mind if you have any, and if you think you do, don't hesitate to disclose it. And then the second thing is I'll ask all of you if you have had any ex parte communication or contact. So if any of you have had any contact with anyone prior to the hearing, so that would be maybe somebody in the historic and the museum itself, or with Carol, and that also includes a visit to the site. And then please declare your nature and the extent of such contact. Now, for me personally, this happens sometimes on the Planning Commission meetings where maybe I've driven by a site just to see what it's like, what the Planning Commission is talking about. And I always call that out and I say, yes, I visited the site, but I didn't speak to anyone. And it does not, cause me to have a different point of view about the judgment of what we're deciding on. So if maybe you visited the site recently, or you've talked to somebody in the museum recently, just use your own judgment about whether you want to call that out. And then also just please clarify if you think that affects your ability to make a fair decision tonight. And that's pretty common too in some of our public, in the Planning Commission meetings. It doesn't mean anything bad. It just means, hey, I'm calling this out, and I've had this situation. So just to be, forthcoming about that sort of thing. And then anyone from the audience is allowed to ask us if they have any concerns or questions, which I doubt will come up tonight. If they say, well, I wonder if this person, and this has happened to me personally, somebody asked if they thought I had a conflict of interest in something. Anyway, so that's fair. Somebody from the audience might do that, but tonight that's probably pretty unlikely, given we'll probably have a small audience. And then what we do is the next step is we hear from city staff. So there's a formal staff report, which was in the package that was posted. Thank you so much, Jamie. So we'll hear from Jamie to provide the staff report of the findings, and then the staff's recommendation about what they think, how they propose or recommend that this group make a decision. And then once that happens, then we, as the hearing body, the HLC, can ask questions of staff. So we can ask questions of Jamie. Also, Don Hardy will be in the meeting, so we could ask questions of Don Hardy if there's something specific to, I don't know, code or something that we might want to ask, but that really doesn't apply in this case very much. So we have once the staff report happens, then we can ask the staff, and if we have any questions. Then we open the hearing, the public hearing, and that's where the applicant and others can speak. So during the public hearing, the first thing that happens is the applicant makes a presentation. In this case, it's Carol Palmer who's doing that on behalf of the Depot Museum, and her material was also posted on the packet, but she also has a PowerPoint. The nice thing, I mean, you've seen Carol's presentations before, but one of the great things I think is that she helps us really understand the criteria for our decision. So our decision is really based on the specific criteria that would be used to determine when a resource, a building or a property or whatever, when a resource is added to the historic register, and how is that decision made? And she spells that out very clearly in the PowerPoint that you'll see. And that helps us know that pretty much everything else isn't part of the decision. So the color of the building, or how the building is sited on the lot, or, you know, whether we like it or not, or whether we think something else should be in the building or not, that really, none of that applies. Where the mailbox is, I'm just making this up. So none of that applies, but what does apply, we can't talk about it specifically right now, but what does apply will be what Carol very clearly spells out as the criteria. And it really helps us, I think, wrap our heads around, well, how am I making this decision? You know, what should I be thinking of? Or more specifically, what should I not have to think about? And there's not a lot, but that all comes from guidelines, not that Carol developed, but guidelines for how things are registered as a historic resource. So very, very helpful there, because I always have a hard time wrapping my head around, you know, what matters. Even when we talked about the historic city hall, it was hard to know, you know, did the windows matter? Did the flagpole matter? Did the, you know, and so what we'll hear about really helps us, you know, limit the things that we have to even think about. So once that's called public testimony. So once Carol is done with hers, then anyone that's in the audience that's a proponent that would like to agree or would like to support that can speak if they want to. And then any opponent can speak if they want to, and anyone that's neutral. And if there are people that speak and there's a need for a rebuttal from the applicant to say, well, you know, you have this, you know, you said this about why you don't agree, but here's maybe a different way of looking at it or something. That doesn't happen a lot, I can tell you that. So, but it is part of the script, and it is something that we always allow in a public hearing, is to hear what the applicant says, to speak for the applicant, to speak against the applicant, and for the applicant to get some chance for rebuttal. And then we close the public testimony. So the public is done at that point. So the applicant isn't doing any more presentation. They're not really answering any more questions. By then, we should have asked all questions that we need of the applicant. Then the hearing body can ask questions just for clarification, and they can respond to that. So, but no one else can ask questions at that point. Then we, as the HLC, we can deliberate amongst ourselves. We can talk to each other about what we think, or if we have concerns or a stumbling block or something, we can talk about that. I don't remember if that came up with the city hall or not, the historic city hall. I think we had a couple minor things that we might have talked about, but it gives us yet another chance to sort of test the pulse of what are we thinking. It's just one more opportunity to talk to each other about it. And then we call for a motion. And this, I might need you guys to write this down because I sent it out in my email. There's one person, one of you, I will call for a motion. I'll say I'm entertaining a motion to approve, blah, blah, blah. And then one of you will need to make the motion. We can't assign it in advance. So one of you will, if you approve, or you're moving to approve, or you're moving to deny, then there's some specific language, and that language changed a little bit. I talked to Don Hardy, I don't know, 30 minutes ago. And this one's a little bit different because the HLC does not have ultimate authority to add something to the historic register. We approve it, but then it goes on from us to the planning commission and the city council, the mayor and the city council. So the motion is just a little bit different. So if a couple of you, if you think you might be the person to make the motion, if you could just jot this note down. So it's just changed a little bit. And so what your script, if you will, you'll say, I move to approve or deny, if that's what you're saying, to include the Canby Depot Museum on the local register of historic places. That didn't change. To include the Canby Depot Museum on the local register of historic places, and to recommend that the planning commission and the mayor and city council also approve. So it's just that end that's a little bit different. Should I read that again, you guys?
And the last one.
Okay. So you say, I move to approve or deny to include the Canby Depot Museum on the local register of historic resources, and to recommend that the planning commission and city council also approve or deny, if that's what you're saying. So I just need, when I call for a motion, I need one person to take that on and just read that script and, make your own decision on if you approve or deny. And then the person who seconds will need somebody to second, and all you need to have, this person who seconds just needs to say, I second that motion. And then we'll take a vote, because we have to have a yes or no vote from each of us individually. We have a quorum tonight because we have everybody, which is great. So we do have opportunities if people approve or don't approve. That's certainly fine. It's certainly up to you. It's each one of us individually is making up our own mind based on the criteria that Carol will help review and based on the materials you've already read. Make sense, everybody?
Yes.
Awesome. You guys are awesome. So I think it's a great opportunity. It's, I haven't been part of this since we have added something to a historic register. Jennifer, has that been something we've done? I know you're on mute, but has that been something that's been done in your time? It's been a while.
No, we haven't added anything. We've just dealt with some major alterations is all.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Fun.
Yeah, I probably should have looked. I can't remember the last time something was added. It's been a minute, and there are probably still some things that could be added if there's enough interest in it from outside parties. It can come from a lot of different places. So there's certainly other historic or heritage resources here that could be added. Specifically, maybe some of the buildings within the fairgrounds. I'm not sure. I mean, it's something we should talk about is, what else might there be out there that could be added? And then after this meeting, then with that conclusion, then it'll go to the planning commission, and there'll be another discussion with the planning commission and another vote. And then it'll go with a recommendation from us and from the planning commission. Then it'll go to the mayor and the city council to also vote. So it's quite a process, which is good because it's a, serious, significant thing. So any questions?
I suppose the last thing that was added was in City Hall. But that was a grassroots petition. Tony Crawford got a bunch of his students, former students together, and they petitioned to, I think that may have gone right to the council. I don't know that it stopped here at the,
Which one was that, Doug? I'm having a hard time hearing you.
it was the old City Hall.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, when Tony Crawford and a bunch of students signed a petition, I think it was,
Oh,
to add Old City Hall. And this was just at the time that, you know, it was gonna be sold and remodeled and all kinds of stuff like that. They said, I don't think so.
huh,
And
interesting. Okay, well, I guess the only other thing for the HLC agenda for tonight is just, I mentioned in the agenda that just FYI, typically we cancel our January meeting and we start again in February. It's just a way of, you know, it's right after the holidays, so we take a bit of a break. I don't think there's anything pressing that we need to discuss that I know about anyway, but if everybody's okay with that, then we'll just go ahead with that decision to cancel the January meeting, and I'll make sure that the city staff knows about that. Is that okay?
first month. That's,
I don't know when that's been the case as long as I've been part of the group. So it's just a, you know, a little, I don't know, a bit of a break. So that's good. I think that's it then for the HLC meeting. So I think it's okay for us to formally adjourn the HLC meeting. It's the same Zoom link. So Jennifer, you don't have to make any changes for the public meeting. It's the same Zoom link. And we'll just go ahead and end this meeting and then wait for the public hearing to start.
So stop it or?
Yep, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Heritage and Landmark Commission for a very important public hearing tonight on December 5th, 2022. We'll be discussing the potential of adding the Canby Historical Museum on the local register of historic resources. So thank you all for joining us. I'll start first by going through the script of how the process works and to be able to entertain any questions about the process, if that's okay. Anyone have any questions to start? Okay. So the matter presented before the hearing body, which is the Heritage and Landmark Commission, requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter if they wish. If you wish to testify on this matter, please fill out the public testimony card and give it to the city staff member. At the appropriate time, when your name is called and you wish to testify, please step forward to the microphone, state your name, your address, and your interest in the matter. You might be limited in time for your presentation. Generally, the applicant, in this case, is the Canby History Museum and Carol Palmer. The applicant has a total of 15 minutes to speak. Any proponents will be given 5 minutes each. The opponents, any opponents will be given 5 minutes each. And anyone thought to be neutral on the matter will also be given 5 minutes each. But since there really aren't any public folks in the audience, I mean, I see Nora. Hi, Nora. It's unlikely that will happen, but it's possible. And then the applicant can have 10 minutes for rebuttal if necessary. All questions must be directed to the HLC chair, which is me. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access and to become a part of the record, and that's been done. Thank you. All written testimony received both for and against prior to the hearing shall be summarized by staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report, and we don't have any of that. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable review criteria as contained and indicated in the staff report. So we'll talk more about the criteria to approve or deny this application. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue may preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Everyone present is encouraged to testify, even if it's only to concur with previous testimony. Okay, so conflict of interest. At this time, I'll ask that any member of the hearing body, which is the Heritage and Landmark Commission, for conflict of interest, who has any conflict of interest, please indicate the nature and the extent of the conflict and whether you intend to participate in or abstain from the hearing in the present matter. Anyone? That's a no. An ex parte contact, also if any member of the hearing body has had any ex parte contact with anyone prior to this hearing, including a visit to the site, please declare the nature and the extent of such contact at this time. Okay, I will self-declare that I have been to the site and I have had conversations with Nora and Carol in general, but generally related to standard HLC research that's been done at the Depot Museum. So it does not affect my judgment and ability to, vote on this issue. Just to make note, I've been there and talked to some people. Okay, does any member of the audience have any questions or of the commissioner regarding the conflict of interest or ex parte contact? Nope. Okay, so then the public hearing, which will start in just a little bit, the public hearing will be conducted as follows. The first thing that happens is we'll have a staff report from Jamie Stickle, who's the Director of Economic Development for the City of Canby. And that was also included in the packet. So Jamie will present her information. And then any questions from the hearing body or the staff, so from the HLC to the city staff to Jamie can occur at that time. That is the primary time that we have to ask Jamie any questions of her report. And then I open the public hearing for testimony from the public, which in this case is the applicant, which is represented by Carol. So Carol will present. And then, as I mentioned, any proponents that wish to speak, they can spend 5 minutes doing that. Any opponents can speak. Anyone that's neutral can speak, and there can be a rebuttal if necessary by the applicant. And that closes the public testimony. And then at that point, if there are questions by the hearing body, by the HLC, we can ask those questions at that time. Then the HLC has some time for deliberation and discussion. We can't have any additional testimony, but if we have some questions of each other, or if we just want to share our thoughts about it with each other, we can do so at that time and deliberate a little bit about where we headed with this decision, perhaps. Does anyone, then we make a decision, I'll call for a motion, and a motion will be made either for or against, to approve or deny. And then there'll be a second, and then I'll call for a vote of each individual person. So does anyone have any questions about the procedure that we've outlined for this hearing? Nope. Well, that's easy. All right, then I think then we can move forward then to start with the staff report from the city. So Jamie, if you're ready, please do that for us.
Thank you so much. So the City of Canby staff received an application to include the Canby Depot Museum on the local register of historic resources. Approval of this application would result in a historic zoning overlay for the depot property, and that's located at 888 Northeast 4th Avenue. It is zoned light industrial, M1. To provide some background, the Canby Historical Society submitted an application to add the Canby Depot to the local register of historic resources. As part of this process, they held a neighborhood meeting on Tuesday, November 1st, and that was to gather information from interested property owners. Neighboring property owners within 500 feet of the Depot Museum were invited to the meeting via a letter that was mailed out. And it was really to provide a forum for the applicant and surrounding property owners to review and consider this proposal. The Canby Depot Museum is eligible for listing on Canby's Historic Landmark Register with its association for early development for the early development of Canby as a shipping and distribution center on the Southern Pacific Main Line that linked Portland to California. With the development, Canby found that it had greater economic flexibility. It opened markets for shipping local crops and goods and increased the number of permanent residents in the city. Some historical dates in 1870, the arrival of the Oregon and California Railroad to Canby. Also 1870, the filing of the town plat, and that led to the construction of the rail depot. 1891 to 1892, Southern Pacific was forced to rebuild the depot, which had been demolished due to a windstorm. As Canby grew, the Southern Pacific updated and enlarged its facility over the years, including in 1911 when 20 feet was added to the warehouse. Moving along to 1976, moving along to 1976, in addition to providing space for people and goods, the depot housed Western Union and Railway Express and remained open and in operation until 1976. In 1978, efforts were underway. The city council passed a resolution to declare the depot a historic site. And in 1983, the warehouse was removed and the depot was moved to the location on Northeast 4th Avenue. From there, the community took on the task of renovating the structure with a new roof, replacement of siding, window and door restoration, rebuilding the loading ramp, painting, installation of a bathroom, and display cases, as well as storage cabinets, and then lowering the warehouse floor. And a grand opening was held on October 6th of 1984. So there are two different items in which this, the Canby Depot Museum is important. One is the historic integrity of the building. The other one is the historic significance. And I am going to read those in greater detail than I went over the dates, just because that is the reason that we are here today. So for historic integrity, built in 1891 to 1892 is the standard Southern Pacific design number 11 combination depot. The Canby Depot is a rectangular structure with a wood frame and post and beam floor structure. It features a side gable and wide overhanging eaves and shaped diagonal braces. The building is clad in horizontal board siding composed of cedar. Exterior trim boards are placed over the siding at vertical and horizontal angles. The prominent windows of the depot are 12/4 double hung sash windows. The original windows were replaced in 2018 with vinyl windows, which present the same look as the original. The original wood window frames remain, and one of the original windows is on display in the museum. The cedar shake roof was replaced with composite shingles during the 1983-84 restoration and replaced again in 2019. The removal of the warehouse addition returned the building to its pre-1911 footprint. Although the perpendicular siding of the depot vis-a-vis the railroad track is a significant alteration, the overall integrity of the structure could be characterized as adequate. For historical significance, Canby's Southern Pacific Railroad Depot is eligible for listing on the Canby Historic Landmark Register for its association with the early development of Canby as a shipping and distribution center on the Southern Pacific's main line that linked Portland to California. Via City Council resolution, Myra Weston, described the depot as the heart of the city, which has grown up around it. Passengers for Portland, San Francisco, and points between and beyond bought tickets and boarded trains at the depot. Incoming and outgoing mail was received and dispatched from there for Canby's and rural post offices in this vicinity. Innumerable tons of products of the area's productive soils were shipped out of Canby, and merchandise was received there for firms in the area until the motor vehicle superseded the steam and later the diesel train. For almost 9 decades, the depot was the focal point of the community's commercial core and a foundational element of its agricultural-based economy. The Canby's Depot is an architecturally significant structure as it is one of the 3 remaining standard number 11 combination depots, of which there was a total of 9 constructed. The depot has association with a long list of civic leaders and activists who contributed in multiple ways to Canby's development. For example, in addition to Myra Weston, who co-owned the Canby Herald with her husband from 1947 to 1972, serving as its reporter and editor. She also co-founded the city's Business and Professional Women's Club. She was instrumental in the campaign that resulted in the election of Bertha Dedman as the city's first woman mayor. Weston is a charter member of the Canby Historical Society and was a driving force to save the depot. Her determination to record and preserve Canby's history has created an invaluable record of the community's past, which is accessible at the Depot Museum. The depot's association with Herman Bergman, station agent from 1958 to 1976, adds to its historic significance. Bergman was a tireless advocate for saving the structure and repurposing it as a museum. And after the relocation, he served as the museum director for 2 decades. And he's responsible for many of the additions to the document archive and artifact collection, including the acquisition of the caboose in August 1989. Furthermore, the depot's historic significance is embedded in the connection to the Lee and Knight families, both of which were instrumental in the pre-1900 development of Canby. Philander Lee sold 111 acres of his donation land claim to the Oregon and California Railway, and he insisted on including a provision in the sales agreement that required the firm to build a depot, a decision that proved critical to the emergence of a small town. In 1892, when the second depot replaced the first, Canby had a thriving Main Street and a growing population. 1 year later, the city was incorporated. And then in 1868, Joseph Knight purchased the Seeley and Jocelyn donation land claims and moved his family from Butteville to Canby. In 1870, he sold a small portion of his land claims to the Oregon and California Rail. After the completion of the rail line through Canby, Knight's sons, William and George, constructed the Knight Mercantile. And another son, Charles, built a pharmacy on the west side of Grant Street. His son, Joseph, erected a sawmill on the Molalla River. George built a grist mill. Adam opened a blacksmith shop. And in addition to many of those commercial offerings, they also constructed homes, a hotel, a schoolhouse, and multiple commercial structures. William Knight became civically and politically active and was instrumental in the city's 1893 incorporation. The first city council meeting took place on the 2nd floor of the Knight building, with Knight serving as the city recorder and Heman, Philander Lee's son, served as the mayor. And so now I will open it up for back to you for any questions that you might have of this.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Jamie. That was a really excellent and detailed staff report. That's so helpful. Really appreciate your hard work on that.
Absolutely.
All right. So does anyone from the HLC have any questions for staff for Jamie on the staff report? Okay, with no questions, then we can move forward and begin the public hearing for testimony. And this is where we hear from the applicant for the Canby Depot Museum, and that's represented by Carol Palmer. So we can get started when you're ready.
Do I need to hit a button on here?
It's going, right now it's green, so.
Okay, I'm good, thanks. Okay. We can go to the second slide. So Jamie has talked about the criteria, and today, of course, your job is to decide if the criteria that's been presented, the evidence that's been presented, it qualifies the building to be added to the local register. Once that is done, assuming you do that, then the next step is, of course, it goes to the Planning Commission. That Planning Commission will be doing is adding the historic zoning overlay, and then finally it goes to the City Council for final approval, and that's the standard process for adding any building to the local registry. And you're probably thinking to yourself, why does this take so much? And how many public hearings do we have to get through this? Because at one time, you know, the City Council already passed a resolution declaring this a historic site. Unfortunately, a resolution is not the proper tool to use to do this process. So that's why we're here today, doing it sort of all over again the way it should be done. But I think it's important to talk about why this is an important process. What does it mean? And now you can go to you're on that slide. Cool. The reason it's important is we want to preserve the structure. So preservation is the primary reason. And what we're doing today is putting, or what you're contemplating today is putting in place a means of making sure that any alterations to the exterior have a full consideration. So minor alterations can be approved by the planning director. Major alterations come to this board, much as what happened to the City Hall in that hearing, for your approval. Minor alterations, I think it's easy to confuse minor and major and think about it in terms of the size of what's being done, but it's actually about the historic integrity. So a minor alteration, let me give you an example of one that's already been done by the Canby Historical Society to the depot. That was several years ago. They decided to replace the roof. The one that was there was 35 years old. You're thinking, well, that's a big job, but it's a minor alteration because the roof was not historic. It had not been there since it was not original. It wasn't even the original material that was used in the original building. So it was one of those repair things that it falls under a minor alteration. An example of a major alteration was about the same time a decision was made to replace the windows in the depot. Those windows would be considered a major alteration because the original windows were still in the depot. They still had full historic integrity, and we actually have documentation photographs of when those windows were restored at the time when the depot was moved. And in this day and age, we have techniques, we have products, and we have companies that really are pros at doing restoration of historic windows. So if that had come before this body at that time, if it had been on the historic register, it would have come before this body at that time. And you would have had a chance to ask about what kind of assessment have you had about restoring the windows, and what does it mean to replace them, and how is that going to alter the way the building looks? So I think the really important part of what you're considering is what this does in terms of ensuring that community input is taken into account anytime a major alteration occurs. So that means, as is happening tonight, if we had someone here to testify, that proponents and opponents of the alteration have a chance, have a public forum to give you input, but also it creates access to an appeal process. So if your decision doesn't sit well with someone, they can appeal to the City Council. That can be appealed to the LUBA, the Land Use Board. It can be appealed to the Court of Appeals, State Court of Appeals, and the State Supreme Court. So that's a way to ensure that the community has a say in what happens to the structure. The next thing that's really important, I think, in terms of preserving the building, the Canby Historical Society is a culturally based nonprofit. Those are financially fragile organizations just by definition, unless they have somebody who gave them a big endowment, but that's hardly happens, very rarely happens. So it's really important for them to have any leg up they can have in order to get funding to do what we want them to do. Is we want them to maintain the building. We want them to keep it in good shape. We want it to be preserved. And so by giving the building a historic landmark status, you're giving it a leg up on any grant consideration restoration. So put yourself on a board. You're a member of a granting organization. You're about historic preservation. That's what you want to fund. You have an applicant that does not have a building that has a building that is not designated, and you have a building that's designated. You know that with the building that's designated, the future and the current alterations will have to go through a review process. You're not guaranteed of that with the other buildings. So where are you going to give your funding? You're going to give it to the building that has the structure of the historic designation in place. So it's really a leg up that really will help the Canby Historical Society do the things they need to do. An old building is a money pit. It's year after year, year after year of repair and replace. So we want them to be solidly able to do that. Another reason why this is important is the designation lasts for the life of the structure. It's not just a win for the owner that has the structure now. There was state Supreme Court ruling in 2016 that affirmed that. The Lake Oswego Preservation Society sued the city of Lake Oswego. Their Heritage and Landmark Commission had approved removing the designation for a very historic property. The city council had affirmed that. The land use board had affirmed it. The county, the state's court approved it, the appeals court, and then the state Supreme Court overturned that ruling. So that affirms what we know to be true in the Secretary of Interior standards, which those standards are part of the basis of the Historic Preservation Code. In the case of the Canby Historical Society, why would this be important? Again, they're a culturally based nonprofit. If for some reason they dissolve, the collection that is in the property now, all of the documents and the artifacts all go to the Clackamas County Historical Society. The property, however, according to the deed, reverts to city ownership. So there would be an ownership switch from the Canby Historical Society to the city of Canby. Cities, municipalities, let's see, how do I say this nicely? Local governments really can't be trusted many times in situations like this. So we want to make sure that the city is doing the right thing. There is, and I don't want to mislead you, public structures over 50 years old are protected under an Oregon Revised Statute 385-653. But that does not allow for community input or access to an appeal process. It's basically the city has to go to the State Historic Preservation Organization and get them to sign off on it. So that's a deal that's made without any public input at all. And so by putting this designation on, you're overriding that, and it means that the public will still have input and they'll still have access to an appeal process. Another reason why this was important from my perspective, and I think from Nora Clark's perspective, was because we wanted to have a complete and accurate record of the history of the structure. And there is some conflicting information out there. You'll hear people say that the depot is the oldest one in Oregon. It is not. You will hear people say that it was a Oregon and California Railroad depot. And then other people will say, no, it's not. So in order to do this properly, I made myself some research rules, use primary source material wherever available, go back to ground zero and exhaust all the research opportunities, not just at the depot, but through the Museum of the Oregon Territory, the Oregon Historical Society, actually the City of Canby, University of Oregon online database, and the SHPO Historic Site database. And also I made it a rule that I would double source. Anytime I had conflicting information, I wanted to know it was confirmed by one or more other sources. And then it was really important that, and you'll probably notice in the what I put in the application, I footnoted like crazy, because I want people to be able to go back and follow that trail of breadcrumbs and understand and see what I saw at the same time. So the findings that I came up with was that the depot is indeed a Southern Pacific design, number 11 combination depot. It was constructed in 1891 to 1892 to replace a station house that was constructed by the Oregon and California Railroad in 1871. I think Jamie mentioned that there are 9 combination 11 depots. I just wanted to clarify that and say that there were actually originally 9 built in Oregon by Southern Pacific. So there are 3 of those that remain, and Canby's is one of those. The other thing that was really sort of disappointing is the community's popular history about the railroad and its depot, I think is, having gone back to the beginning and looked at all of those documents and spent hours going through boxes and files, I was amazed at how shallow it is and how the history that's, as it's generally told, overlooks and minimizes people, events, actions that were actually critical to the development of this community. In some cases, transformational, I would say. And so it was really important in the historic significance section of what I submitted that I tried to capture some of that has been overlooked before. Things like the Philander Lee signing having the sales agreement. That was a really important event. And there's lots of talk about how he insisted that the streets be wide enough to turn around an oxen cart. But it seems to me that sales agreement was pretty darned important. And then the final thing for me that I hope is clear and even though it's sort of implied, that it's clear in the application, is that the primary source material housed at the depot is remarkable. Every time I go there and open those files and start looking at that primary source material, I am amazed. For a small town, it is just a real treasure. And so I thought this was a way to hopefully demonstrate that. And so the footnotes are filled with things that I found at the depot that actually the city doesn't even have in their files. So that was a fun part. And I don't know if I'm allowed to, if people are supposed to ask questions now, or if I wait till later for that. Or
The first thing, yeah, we ask for opponents and proponents and that'll go by quickly and then we can take questions.
I'll leave you now.
Okay, thank you so much, Carol. All right, so is there anyone in the public in the audience that's a proponent that would like to speak on behalf of the Historic Depot Museum? I don't see anybody, and no one, I assume there are no opponents. No one wishes to speak as an opponent, and no one that wishes to speak that's neutral on the subject. Okay, so that closes the public testimony, and it's at this time that the hearing body, the Heritage and Landmark Commission, can ask questions of the applicant if you wish. If you do, since you're sitting on the dais, you may need to press the button on your microphone till the light turns green. So anyone from the HLC have any questions? No questions? Okay, great. I know it's a subject that we've been very informed about, so it's been very helpful. We've got some really good background information, so that's been great. Okay, so at this point then, we have opportunity within the HLC group to deliberate or have any discussion amongst ourselves. We have any clarifying questions of each other or anything we want to talk about, how we're thinking about it, or any comments to each other at this point? Be thinking about how you might want to vote, or if you have questions that would cause you to vote one way or then another, questions of each other. Not yet. Okay, then I think we're prepared then to entertain a motion to approve the Canby Depot Museum to be included in the local register of historic resources. So I'm looking to entertain a motion for that from the HLC.
I move to approve to include the Canby Depot Museum on the local registry of historic resources and to recommend the Planning Commission and City Council to approve.
Excellent, thank you. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. All right, so now we'll take a vote, and why don't we start with the folks in the room there? Start with you, Rachel, perhaps, and go through that group, and then we'll do the 2 online folks. So approve, say I approve, or I deny.
I approve.
Karina,
I approve.
Ron,
I approve.
Doug,
I approve.
Jennifer,
I approve.
and this is Judy and I approve. So that's a vote of 6-0. So it's passed unanimously to approve the HLC approval of the Canby Depot Museum to the local register of historic resources and to move that on with a recommendation to the Planning Commission and to the City Council. And I think that's really it for our hearing. Any questions or comments?
I had just one thing I'd like to add, that with this approval, then it will go forward, as we talked about, to our planning commission, and it looks like that will go to the January 9th planning commission meeting. Don Hardy and I confirmed that earlier today, that it will be on that agenda. So since it was a unanimous approval and there were no opponents or no need to revisit, I will be working on that staff report for the planning commission packet, and we will make sure that you guys get a link to that as soon as it is live, just so that you can follow that progress and or attend if you'd like. And then it will go from there to the city council.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jamie. All right, everyone, then that concludes our meeting for this evening and the public hearing. So thank you very much. Thank you for the staff report and for the applicants' excellent reports that help us make a decision. So thank you so much. Good night, everyone.